So read, stuck on the block, read, sitting in the box, read. What's going on, people? This is Akala, and this week's great read is, some of you may know I wrote a book of the same title. It's not a coincidence. I was directly inspired by this book, The Ruins of Empires by Count Constantine de Volney, C.F. Volney. Volney was a French scholar who was part of the Napoleonic expedition, or colonization, of Egypt that rediscovered the ancient artifacts of the pyramids and the Sphinx and all of that. But he's written he was 25 when he wrote this, by the way, which is a bit scary. If you read it, you'll know why. The use of language, the maturity and understanding of history. But he's written a semi-fantastical, spiritual, meditative account of why human empires rise and fall. And it just is one of the most influential books I've ever read. What is fascinating about this book, I've got two versions of the book. This book version is printed by a company called Black Classic Press, who I believe are based in Chicago, who ironically print quite a lot of radical literature written by Europeans themselves during the periods of slavery and colonialism. We're always persuaded to believe that during that period, basically everyone was racist and we've made so much progress. But when you start to read some of the scholarship, people like Volney, people like Gerald Massey or E.H.L. Harine or Godfrey Higgins, you start to realize there was a lot of European scholars at the time, or at least a small group, that was telling the truth. I mean, Massey wrote 6 books, which we'll maybe come to one day, explaining that humanity had evolved out of Africa, not just physically, but culturally, politically, linguistically, scientifically. Actually, Africa had contributed to the development of humanity, and in fact was the basis of it, a white working class English scholar. But we'll come back to that guy. Gerald Massey's book, what's interesting about the 2 versions I've got, both of which I've read, is that one, printed by a different publisher, took out a lot of what Massey said, a lot of what Volney says about Africa's influence on the development of Western civilization, which is fascinating. Imagine taking that out of a book before you reprint it. And he basically says a whole bunch of stuff that today is very unhelpful for people who believe in racial hierarchy, and was even more unhelpful in the time that he wrote it. So he wrote this in the height of transatlantic slavery, when Europe's economy depended literally on the idea that Africans were innately genetically inferior, which was the justification for enslaving them. And Volney says things like, well, a race of men now rejected on account of their sable skin and frizzy hair, founded on the studies of nature, those very laws and civil systems that still govern the universe. Words to that effect. I'm paraphrasing off the top of my head. He said something else like, there's now a race of men that we owe, the same race of men that we hold in contempt, of course by many men and women, we owe our very use of art, sciences, and even speech. So he wrote some very, very strong statements about the influence of ancient Egyptian civilization on the development of ancient Greece and subsequently of all Western society. And he looked at the Sphinx and immediately was like, rah, big African spread nose, clear negroid features, which is why the nose probably went missing. So he immediately recognized when he got to ancient Egypt, as did Francois Champollion, the founding father of Egyptology, and many others, that ancient Egypt was a fundamentally African civilization. And all of that was very controversial at the time. So he was looked down upon, his works were distorted, and today the only people that bother to print his books are crazy Afrocentric black people from America. But this week's great read is The Ruins of Empires by Count Constantine de Volney. Big up. So read, stuck on the block, read, sitting in the box, read.